hashtag Are You Serious panel. I just wanted to give a few intro words. When we use the title hashtag Are You Serious, we did not mean to patronize any student in any way. We just wanted a creative way for you guys to feel like you can ask these questions. And with these questions, these are the segue for you to be able to start these difficult and uncomfortable conversations. I know that most of the panel, well, I hope all the panel here will be okay with you asking questions after this panel is done. And I am just thankful that you all are here and that you guys all submitted questions, or I hope most of you submitted questions. So without further ado, hashtag Are You Serious?
Hi, I'm Stephanie and I'm going to be the moderator tonight. And to get it started, the first question is, what are some stereotypes that have been made about you? And have you ever felt stereotyped by a fellow student or an authority figure here at Asbury?
Hi. See, some stereotypes that I've encountered in my life. That I'm good in math. I'm not good in math, so sorry. Just look at my math 120 score. That all Asians get straight A's. That is not true. To get straight A's, we have to work hard, even harder than everyone else too. And I think that goes for everyone. Let's see, on campus, have I ever been stereotyped by a student or faculty member? I hate to say this, but yes. Shout out to my brother from another mother, Ian Tan. I don't know if he's here, but I have been mixed up several times since coming here. I've been called Ian many times. I've had full-on conversations that people pretended that I was Ian, like 10 straight minutes. So just know that I'm Tinson, hey, that Ian Tan's Ian. Let's see, and one other example is, it was like really recent. One student here, this was like a year ago, when she was like one of my friends, and she said to me, "Oh, are you Chinese or Japanese?" And that's a legit question. And so I respond Chinese because I'm Chinese American, and the response is what throws me off. Instead of like, oh, like engaging in more conversation, she was like, "Yeah, I guessed it right." It was like she won the lottery or free tuition or something. So that kind of just threw me off a bit, you know. So yeah.
All right. Good evening. My name is Ryan Palomo. To be stereotyped, yes, have been plenty of times. For me, I'm Costa Rican, and most people ask that classic mean girl quote, "Then why you white?" So to be asked to, when I say I'm Costa Rican, people give me that look like, "But you're white." So it makes me feel very uncomfortable, or that I'm not good enough to be Costa Rican. So, and I would say like, that's the first initial reaction, but when people start speaking with me and talking with me, they just have like, "Well, where are you from? You have like an accent, you have something that's different about you. What is it? What is it?" And so when I'm saying like, "I'm Costa Rican, I'm Hispanic, etc., they just like look at me, "No, for real, like for real though, like where are you from?" And I'm like, "Well, parents were born and raised in Costa Rica, maybe born here in New York, but that's my culture and that's who I am." And so it's hard sometimes to explain, because sometimes like it's, when I talk with students or even faculty members, they still ask that look like, "Well, why you're white, but how is there?" And then I explain. So I get that, you know, they may be uneducated on some things or etc. So then I explain, but sometimes it feels uncomfortable to talk about those things, because it's like, well, this is who I am. So the fact that sometimes they're not accepting of like that I'm Costa Rican and I look like this. I'm not dark, or I'm not dark hair complected, etc. That it's really hard sometimes. And yes, it has been here on campus or just off campus as well. But it is stereotyped every day, but it's one of those things where you can't let it bother you, because you know who you are in Christ, etc. So that's what I do.
I'm Maria. As a member of the majority culture here in Wilmore and in Asbury, like other people, I'm assuming that at some point someone has stereotyped me because of something they think they know about me, but it would be negligible and not really worthy of discussion.
Alright, I'm Eliza, and I'm from Malaysia. So, I guess common stereotypes. I am Chinese ethnically, but I'm not from China. So I do get that a lot, like, oh, are you from China or Japan or Korea? I am Malaysian, but I am, well, mostly Chinese. And I guess math, martial arts, small I's, maybe, straight A's. Not all of that's wrong. Necessarily, I'm speaking for all of us. Let's see. I guess the question that I do get mixed up with Yoon Lee. I get mixed up with Yoon Lee a lot, who's Ian's sister. I get mixed up with Evie Cox, too, very often. And a question I get, I think, pretty often is, oh, you're from out of the country. Your English is so good. So English is my first language. So. Hopefully it's good.
I'm Joshua. I am a white Caucasian American. Somewhere along the line have German and Scottish descent, but I would be considered a privileged white male, and so that's the voice that I'm contributing. And so there's not a whole lot of stereotype that I can contribute to the conversation other than because I'm white, I can't dance, which is 100% true.
Hey guys, I'm Isaac. The stereotypes that I've encountered with this community have actually been, I'm biracial, so I'm white and black. And that's my favorite stereotype that I run into. So if someone hears me listen to the Civil Wars, they'll be like, wow, Isaac, you're so white. Or if they hear me listening to Migos in my dorm room, they'll be like, wow, Isaac, you're so black, like what ghetto you come from. And the biggest thing that I've encountered is this partiality between white culture and black culture, as if like one thing I do makes me black and I'm acting black that day, or one thing I do makes me white and I'm acting white that day, where in all reality, I'm just a person. Like I am a man, and I listen to the Civil Wars and Migos sometimes in the same playlist.
Awesome. Okay. So, have you ever felt that you had to give up a dream because of how people viewed you as your ethnicity?
I would say no, but I would have to fight for my dream. So like my dream currently now is to be hopefully a music teacher. But often like some of my relatives and some of my friends think, oh, you can't get a life with music. That really can't be your dream. Go to like a doctor, go to some profession of science. So it's like just constantly striving and fighting for your dream is what I would encourage everyone to do.
For me personally, no, but for my family, my grandfather, when I hear their stories, yes, their genes have been stopped because of who they are or who they come from. My grandfather came from Costa Rica in the 80s when God wanted to come here, and it's one of those hard things for my whole family. My mom, grandparents, uncles, everyone had a really hard time coming here to America because they all looked at them and said, then why are you here? You need to go back home. And my grandfather wanted to become the bishop and go all the way. So he got stopped many times and people were not accepting that he wanted to do this. It's, well, you're Costa Rican, you should go back home. Or you won't have any education here. You won't have a job here. So it was hard for my family to hear those stories and dreams, but they, exactly what Tintin said, they had to fight for it. And because of they stood and they were very firm in their beliefs and who they are, that they were able to fight that, and those dreams are now, they're living those dreams right now, so.
Alright, personally, no, I have not had to give up on a dream. On the contrary, I think that like being from a different ethnicity and being female may actually benefit me in certain situations. And I think one time that I really realized this was when I met up with my advisor. I'm a media comm major, and I was just talking to him about how post-production, the editing process, is my favorite part of just the filmmaking process, and how and just the possible career options that would be open to me. And he was just telling me that being a non-white female can actually put me at an advantage on getting a career in editing, which is one part of filmmaking that is not very popular as well, because most people enjoy the production process. So that's one thing that may work out in my favor. I have been placed at a disadvantage sometimes with like maybe searching for scholarships. I will be studying abroad next semester, and just when I was trying to search for scholarships, it was really hard finding those that I was eligible for, because most of them were for American citizens. So that would be a disadvantage, but a small one comparatively.
Oopsie. So for this question, it's a little different. It's asking, why do we still talk about racism if there's none here? I have never seen racial oppression. Who would like to do it?
So I actually really appreciate this question because I think it's very telling. I don't know if you guys are aware of the Mike Ditka quote that came out a while ago. Mike Ditka he was an NFL coach for a while, and he said, "I haven't seen racial oppression in the last 100 years, so I don't really understand what all the fuss is about." He's not wrong, and neither is the person that asked this question. He has not seen racial oppression in the last 100 years. He's a football coach in the NFL, so the black people that he interacted with were NFL stars. They were making millions just like white players were. So what he saw was there was no oppression, there was no racism there. But the issue is that his lens was very, very tainted. So what he saw wasn't the truth. If you look at Asbury's campus, you're gonna see 90% white people. In the real world, 90% of the world is not white. So if you say, I see 90% of the world as white, it doesn't mean that the world is 90% white. So if this person that asked this question, which is a valid question, says, I don't see any racial oppression, then you have to kind of listen for it. You might have to seek out and say, well, I don't know people of color, let's see the oppression that they deal with. Or even as a man, I don't see gender inequality. So you have to go and listen to someone that does see it, listen to someone that does experience it. Because otherwise you're gonna be someone that just says, if I don't see it, it doesn't exist, which is an incredibly flawed way to look at the world as a Christian, because we're supposed to have new eyes and a new heart to think as the Lord does.
Say at Asbury's campus we have it a lot better than a lot of different places. But I think there's always going to be the need for empathy and for both parties to just place ourselves in each other's shoes. And I think just being aware that each of us, every one of us have a bias, like that would be the first step toward true equality and just appreciating one another as brothers and sisters in Christ.
I think Isaac's answer was really good, and what we need to be listening for, right? So if my window of the world is only people that look like me, then I might assume there's no racial oppression. I have never seen a hurricane, ever, but it exists, right? And I can see evidence of it, and I can hear people talk about it, and I can watch the news. So I may not witness myself racial oppression, but if I'm listening and I'm looking, I can see the effects of it. And so I would say to the person who asked that question, just asking that question is telling that your worldview is probably very small, and you need to be seeking out people who have a different voice and a different perspective than yours. So I would be a bit harsher and more sarcastic, I think.
To add on, do you believe that reverse racism exists? And is it wrong to feel pride for being white in comparison to the black is beautiful? Is it?
Yeah, this is another one of my favorite topics. Well, let me start off by explaining what someone means when they say reverse racism. So when people typically bring up reverse racism, they're talking about people of color now that their positions have changed in society, that the white people are the ones that are now being discriminated against. So there's like, typically, scholars believe that there's two kinds of racism. There's personal racism, like I do not like this specific people group, and there's systemic racism. Systemic racism is it's a lugubrious field. It's a lot of study, like the mass prison industry, the labor force, the school system. There's a lot of components of systemic racism. In the reverse racism field, I mean, I'm gonna say this kind of jokingly, but like, what field are white people left out of? Like prison? I mean, like, you know, like that's the only one like they're not disproportionately involved in. So if you look at stuff like the prison system is disproportionately full of people of color. So if you're a white person looking at it from that perspective, I'm confused as to where you feel that you are systemically oppressed. And so in America, I would love to have a debate with someone that says this is an area where white people in society are given no chance to succeed. And so systemically, it really doesn't exist. You can look at a lot of studies, it doesn't exist. Personally, every race has to struggle with the fact that as a man, in our fallen human nature, as a man or a woman, we judge on the outward appearance and not the heart. So everybody can struggle with personal racism. That in that case, reverse racism does exist. In our hearts, you can look at someone and judge them from their outward appearance rather than the conduct of their character. That is true for every person. As far as systemic racism, you'd be hard-pressed to find a case where white people are just left out of society in education, in economics, in really any prestigious field. So that's my answer to that question.
I agree with Isaac on that point. As a systemic oppression of white people, I don't think that exists either. What I want to kind of address is that question of, is it wrong to feel pride for being white? And I would challenge it with, is it right to feel pride of any kind? It's pretty clear in Scripture that pride is a sin, that we elevate ourselves as better than something. We think we can do things on our own. So I mean, I would say yes to that. It is wrong to feel a sense of pride for being white. Is it wrong to recognize that you are privileged and you do have it better than other people? No, that's a fact. Your situation, your God-given gifts, talents, and abilities, and just the people around you are different and better off than some other people. But to take advantage of that in a prideful manner is not what we should do with it. To use that platform to advocate and to be a voice for those that don't have that voice is what we should do with being white, not feel a sense of pride because of it. So that's what I would say.
And then this is actually a part of the question I forgot about, the whole Black is Beautiful campaign. To anyone that has confusion about why that campaign exists, I urge you from the bottom of my heart to talk to a Black woman in your life. If you don't have one in your life, find one. And ask them about the subtle cues that society has told them. Ask them about stuff that they have heard in the church. I have 3 Black sisters. And you will be incredibly amazed by the stories. You'll be amazed as to why they have to tell themselves that Black is beautiful. I've been drawn to tears because of stuff that my Black sisters have told me. I'm not gonna answer that. We don't have a Black woman on this panel, so please, everyone in the audience, ask a Black woman in your life how they feel about beauty standards and why Black is beautiful is important to them.
I would just add to the second part of that question about, is it okay to have pride in being white or saying Black is beautiful? And I would say, yeah, I agree. We shouldn't be prideful, but we are allowed to be thankful for the way that God made us, as long as you recognize that you had absolutely nothing to do with that. So if you were born white, that's great. You didn't have a say in it. And so it's not a source of pride. It's just a source of thankfulness for the way that God made you, whatever that may be.
Okay, thank you so much. Due to recent events such as DACA and taking a knee, do you think the media is portraying an us versus them mentality? Who would like to take this first?
Short answer to this question, I would say yes. I think that the media portrays an us versus them mentality in almost everything that they do. I think that we live in a culture of opinions. We turn on the news and watch, depending on what news network we're watching, we watch a certain bias or a certain opinion one way or the other. When we get on Twitter to read people's opinions, right? People are driven by what other people's opinions are, which is a really interesting thing, just in general to think about. But I think that spills out into mass media in a very large way. And I think it's important to keep that in mind when we take in the media that we take in, to think about it is told from someone's perspective, it's told from someone's point of view. Yeah.
I think that it's true that the media does portray it as us versus them, but I think it's also a reflection of reality in many ways. When you hear people with very strong opinions on immigration, DACA, deportation, refugees, who speak from the standpoint of, I don't want it, I don't want refugees, I don't like DACA, I don't, all those things, they usually are saying, we and you, us and them, right? So I think the media probably makes it worse, but I also think it's probably a reflection of reality.
So this one's for Eliza. As an international student, have you ever felt unwelcome in America because of your ethnicity?
Okay, so I am speaking from my own experience. I have a limited perspective. I would encourage you to speak to the other internationals that we have on campus. We have quite a few. Have I ever felt not welcomed? I think when I first came to America, the Americans that I interacted with did a really good job with just being friendly and welcoming, almost to the point of being overwhelmingly so. But I think past that initial first few questions was when I started feeling a little like a fish out of water, because when I first came, I was also thrown into like an intensive media program with like 30 to 40 Americans. I was the only international and the only new student in that situation. And friendships are built primarily on shared experiences and shared backgrounds and a shared past. So I can definitely understand that that makes it hard to relate to someone from a different culture. So in that sense, I've not felt explicitly ostracized, but I have felt like that I've not fit in. But that has also made me reflect a lot on myself, and just in the way I carry myself as well, because it can be a never-ending cycle of me just like assuming that, oh, they don't want to reach out to me or they don't want to talk to me because I look different from them and because I am different, when it actually might be because I'm withdrawing into myself and I'm giving off the impression that like I don't want anyone to talk to me, and then it's just a never-ending cycle because people think that I want my space. And also just like, I think after freshman year, I went back home, and here I'm the minority, but back home in Malaysia, I have some Americans who attend my church, so they would be the minority in that context. And having spent a year in America, going back, like, they seemed less alien to me, because I was able to travel and like to different states and interact with so many more Americans when I was here, and that gave me a whole new perspective and just made me be able to be a better host to them as well, like having that exposure and having been able to put myself in their shoes, and having done homestays in like different states across America. And so it goes both ways, and I think one thing that just keeps us from being welcoming to people different than us is fear. It's just a sense of, it's natural to feel fearful and scared of things that are unfamiliar to us. And it always requires getting out of our comfort zone. But perfect love casts out fear. And that's something that I'm working on, and something that I just hope that we're all striving for.
Thank you. So, next question is, what's the difference between Latino and Hispanic?
Okay, so this is one of my favorites, because growing up, I was very confused on like Hispanic and being Latino. Some people are like, it's all the same thing, it's all one thing. No, it's not. Latino is basically Latin American, and it's a Latino heritage, basically. So, for example, Hispanic is Spanish-speaking origin. So, for example, Brazil, it's Latino. You have a Latino background, you have a Latin heritage. However, you're not going to consider yourself Hispanic because Brazilians' main language is Portuguese. I cannot talk today. But I would say, for example, Spain, they will not consider themselves Latino because they are in Spain, they're in Europe. However, they are Hispanic because they do speak Spanish. So it's kind of confusing sometimes, but when you get down to it, it's basically on your culture and who you are and what country you come from. So like Costa Rica, for instance, some people say I'm Latino and I'm Hispanic. So you can combine the both. But so I have a Latin heritage, but I'm Hispanic because I'm speaking Spanish. So hopefully that clears it up.
Thank you so much. Next question is, how do you feel when someone asks you to speak a different language? Who wants to take this one first? If anyone does. Yeah, great.
So I don't think many people know this, but I don't speak Mandarin. I speak Cantonese, which is the Hong Kong dialect. And so when people ask me that question, like, speak something for me, part of me feels really, really excited that they wanted to get to know more about the language that my secondary language that I speak and know more about the culture. But I also feel slightly offended because it feels like I'm being interrogated almost. Like, if I can't speak this phrase like, I like to go to school every day and eat the cat food. I don't know how to say that. And it's like, am I Asian enough? I guess that's standard. So, yeah, it's like half and half for me.
So when people ask me to speak Spanish, like for me, I don't take it too offensive. I'm like more than happy to do it sometimes. But speaking on terms for my family or friends that I've heard on things, it puts you on the spot and it's very uncomfortable because some people feel like it's a talent for them and it's like it's not a game. So when asking, hey, speak for me, it's like me asking, hey, start singing for me. And it's like, I don't want to be put on the spot or have them be put on the spot. So it's one of those things where you should ask it, can you speak for me, please? Or would you be willing to speak for me? It's one of those things where the way you ask it helps tremendously in how you present that question. Just instead of demanding it, ask and see if they're willing to do it. And not respect the fact that they're not comfortable in speaking. But do pay attention when they do hear it. Don't be surprised or act different because it's who they are.
Generally, I'm fine with it. I enjoy it, but I think it really depends on the spirit in which it's asked. And as long as you're willing to also discover more about like my cultural context and the fact that I'm not fluent in all the languages I speak too. But generally I'm fine with
it. Okay. What progresses have you seen as a nation in how we treat minorities? Who would like to take this one?
As a nation as a whole, obviously there's been progress, okay? I mean, like, I can drink, my parents are allowed to get married now. My grandparents and my great-grandparents, that couldn't be the case for them. So that's obviously progress. I'm actually gonna answer this question by not answering the question because I want you guys to think about the fact that sometimes progress can be a hindrance. There's an idea called moral licensing, and something that happens in societies all over the world has historically happened, and that is once you make progress, people they take that as a moral license to be like, we got that figured out, so now we're gonna go back to the way things were, sometimes even worse. For instance, there's an example of an artist, there was like an exclusive art club, and they didn't let women in. And they let one woman almost get into the exclusive club, and because she came so close to getting in, they didn't have a woman inducted for another 80 years. And so there's always a caution that comes with progress, which is saying, are you just doing enough? I wrote an article about this in the Collegian a little while back, and it was essentially saying, have we just done enough to make people be quiet, or have we really taken the time to actually listen for progress? Have we done enough to where we say, okay, black citizens can vote, or have we taken measures to say, we're gonna give them a voice in the political process? And there's a big difference there. If you say black people can vote, but disproportionately black citizens aren't being involved in the legislative process, and you're not asking questions as to why, then have we really made progress? Do you still want black? Answering that question, I'm sure someone else could, but that's one lens that's very important to look at the world with when you are evaluating progress.
I think that was really well said, that it's important to ask the question of what progress are you making? And I think from my perspective, I would say we haven't made enough. I think, like Isaac was talking about, we like to play this comparison game of like, well, things were so bad then, and they're so much better now, so we're okay. And I think that that creeps into a lot of areas of our lives, and it can be dangerous. Comparison leads to complacency, and complacency is bad for us. It does lead us to take steps back and to take steps in the wrong direction. And so I think for a while we were kind of lulled to sleep about the progress that's been made in this country of racial oppression and of the rights of people who are minorities in this country. And I think with recent events like we talked about, we've kind of been rudely awakened into the fact that we really haven't come that far as people are treated. The rights might be there, like Isaac was saying, but how are we really treating people, and has that changed that much? And I would venture to say it really hasn't, as a whole. Personally, like for you, that might be different, and maybe you have had a lot of progress in your own perspective of how you see minorities in your life and how you see people around you. But as a collective whole, I really don't think we've come far enough. So.
I don't know if this is where you got that example, but I would encourage you all to listen to Malcolm Gladwell's Revisionist History. Is that where it's from? And that story is in there, and it's a really fascinating podcast about how even electing an African American president sort of allows us to then get complacent in real life and allows us to say and do things that maybe even before we would have been afraid to say and do, because we can say, oh, well, we elected an African American president, so we're good now. So I think we have made progress. I was thinking about this some today and wondering if some of the tension that we see in our nation now, the increasing tension that I think is really discouraging, might be a sign of progress. When we have tension, it means that change is happening. And I think that we're seeing people who have been systemically oppressed and then not overtly systemically oppressed for a while saying it's not enough and it's making the majority culture uncomfortable. We also have increasing diversity in our nation, and so there's the Caucasian white culture, I think, feels threatened by that, so it's going to create tension. So I think that we should be alarmed in the sense that as Christians we need to be listening to what's happening and saying this isn't good, but I think we should also be encouraged that some of what we're seeing is a result of, or a necessary means to progress, if that makes sense.
Now, what conditions would make you feel comfortable to speak up when offended? Who'd like to answer this?
I actually got to run to practice soon after this question, so I appreciate y'all listening. One thing that can happen on a campus like Asbury, and it's happened to me just within my own basketball team, is being a very limited voice as a person of color here. I feel like I have a word count on things I can complain about. Like, I can complain about the prison system and I can complain about our education system, but if I start complaining too much, it's like, Isaac, will you just shut up with your rhetoric? Which I don't blame people, because I understand people that are always, quote unquote, yelling about some form of oppression. So I would just encourage y'all to understand that there's a lot of microaggressions, which is, if you don't know what that means, you can look it up. There's a lot of microaggressions that occur that being in a place like this, I feel like I have to ignore because there's bigger fish to fry, which sometimes isn't, I get over it, but for some people it isn't fair. There's some people that aren't heard because they feel like their issue isn't big enough. And as a Christian body, we have such an incredible community here at Asbury. Every struggle that anyone faces is a big enough fish to fry. If it's big enough for God, then it should be big enough for us and with our friends. So I know for me that sometimes the little things get swept under the rug because there's a bigger problem going on, I need to address that.
Thank you so much, Isaac. what would you say is the difference between cultural appropriation and appreciation? Yeah.
Okay, cultural appropriation is basically when a dominant culture uses cultural elements of a marginalized or subordinate cultural group for and represents it in a way that doesn't give its original meaning justice. And we see this a lot in the media, in fashion and advertisements very frequently. Whereas appreciation would be just approaching that with like an attitude of respect and trying and knowing that like obviously mistakes will be made, but doing your research before you try to like adopt cultural elements from another culture. And something I have to say about this is cultural appropriation can be a very tricky thing, and a lot of times it's done unintentionally, and it can hurt, it can offend, and it's something that we do have to watch out for, but at the same time, we can't swing to the other extreme of just of apathy. So, like personally, I would prefer someone calling me by the wrong name than compared to someone who just doesn't talk to me all year because I look different. So there's a fine line between that, but just that genuine interest, I think, is something that that we all should strive for. And so speaking from someone from Malaysia, there is a fusion of cultures in Malaysia. It's so multicultural, it's very diverse. There are 3 dominant ethnic groups, and we all retain our traditions. We're still very different, but at the same time, like we adopt each other's cultures. And like Malays would be fine with me wearing Malay dress, and Malay can wear Indian dress, and Indians can wear Chinese dress, and that's totally fine. And it's a way that we appreciate each other's culture. There's a whole other cultural group called the Baba Nyonya Peranakan, which is a result of Malays and Chinese who intermarried in the past. And their food is just a fusion of both Malay and Chinese, and I think they just add a beautiful richness to our culture and just more diversity and makes it more beautiful. So while we do have to approach this whole matter with like respect and caution, don't swing to the other extreme of just avoiding just different cultural groups, and because it is really important just to show that we appreciate each other.
Thank you. So, for the final question, I'm going to ask, if I'm white and I want to educate myself on racial issues and cultural differences, how do I go about that without being unintentionally offensive? And what can I do to change and be better with understanding and checking myself? I'd like to take this one.
Well, I probably have been unintentionally offensive with really good intentions. So I think my advice as a white person would be to say, go forward with humility and care and caution, but go forward. Invite people into your life who don't look like you and who have different perspectives from you to speak into your life. Get mentors who can tell you if you're being offensive. Ask people who are different than you to speak into your life. Ask them, and what I'm saying offensive? Is it coming off the right way? Can I ask this? Can I say this or that? If you have a hard time finding people like that in your life, I think you have to be really intentional about it. I have found that probably I've blundered my way through it at some point, but I've just said to some people, I'm not trying to make you my token Black friend, but I really need you to speak into my life. I need your wisdom. I value your perspective, and I really need it. And I think when that's done with humility, then it can be accepted, and that can be a really fruitful relationship.
I definitely agree with what Maria was just saying, that humility is such an important piece of it. And I think just like anything else that we want to learn from someone, it starts with relationship. Just like if we were sharing the gospel with somebody, we ideally wouldn't just go up to them and start talking. We would start with a foundation of relationship. And we start with mutual interests and things that we can build on. And having a foundation of a relationship does give you the ability to ask the questions that you want to know. If you just go up to somebody on the street and ask them what it's like to be a person of their color, it could come across as you only care about them because they're different than you, and that's not what you're going for. If you really want to learn, relationship is important for that. And I think it's also important that once you educate yourself, that shouldn't just sit there. You should do something with what you have learned. I spoke earlier that, and Maria said that because you are white and because you are privileged, you can be thankful for that, but there was nothing that you did to earn that, to put yourself in that situation. But it does give you a platform that other people may not have. It gives you a platform to say to people who really don't feel like their life matters, that it does, and to advocate for that. In situations of social issues and things going on in the world, silence can be better than a reaction out of just anger and initial gut reaction, but a well thought out, well educated response is always the best. And I think that when we learn these things about what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes, and it does come down to empathy, like Eliza said at the beginning, I will never fully understand what it's like to be a minority in this country to the extent that a lot of people do. But I can strive to empathize with it to the best of my ability. And if I could add to that what it means for a white male that is a Christian as well, going back to people feeling like their lives don't matter. If you know who Judah Smith is, he was quoted as saying that if there is a people group that genuinely feels like they don't matter and their race does not matter, as Christians, why are we not dropping everything to rush to that and to meet that need? We follow a guy who literally took on burdens of people around him, and he did absolutely nothing of what he was punished for. He took on other people's burdens even when it was nothing that he did, and there was no correlation there. And so if I could liken that to, as people who are white in this country, we have the ability to take on the burdens of people who feel like their lives don't matter, who feel like their voice isn't heard. And so I think that once we have that education, it's important to advocate for those who don't feel that they can stand as boldly as we can.
Both Josh and Maria make really good points, and I just wanted to add on to that by saying, do not make assumptions, because assumptions tend to lead to stereotyping and racism, and just to engage in conversation with one another. That's the best way to truly learn more about each other and unite.
Well, I was just going to add, with forming relationships with people who don't look like you, I think it's really important to read material from different authors, from different perspectives, listen to podcasts, go to worship with people who are different ethnicity than yourself, and listen. Listening is never offensive, right? So if you ask and you just listen for the answer, you're not going to offend someone.
Coming from the perspective of an international, it's a mutual exchange, and personally, I think the word reverse racism shouldn't exist. I think it should just be flat out racism, and we can be racist towards people of any culture. So, coming back to the issue of pride, a sinful sort of pride and just viewing yourself as superior to someone else, that is wrong, that is sinful. But it is not wrong to feel a sense of cultural pride, just in who you are as an American, in your own cultural background. I appreciate that because I'm still learning more about American culture, about culture in Kentucky, about Southern culture, and if you don't love your culture, how am I going to learn from it, and how am I going to love it as well? So it doesn't mean that you have to deny who you are. And the whole like have conversations. And the whole fact that it is an exchange means that like we have to embrace our own cultural backgrounds, but we have to be open to embrace cultures that are different from ours.
Thank you everyone for answering the questions, and thank you everyone for coming. It was really, I'm glad the turnout. We're gonna have Sandy here close us out.
We can give another hand to our panel for answering those questions so eloquently. And like I said earlier, and as was mentioned many times, it's important to befriend people. These many wonderful people gave their own perspectives, and not everyone shares the perspectives that they hold, though a lot of what they said was very truthful and had a lot of great meaning behind it. So when you find people, be sure to befriend them and have those relationships with them and have those very uncomfortable, vulnerable conversations, because that's just how we as community can go from here to another point where we can just be culturally competent and all that good stuff. So thank you guys for coming, even though we had a few technical difficulties. I hope there's still more snacks. If you guys want more snacks, get that. But other than that, thank you for coming.